30 years old. That was considered a long life. Not elderly, just 30. In the same land where one of history's most powerful women sat on a golden throne, the person farming her wheat could be dead before they ever saw their own child grow up. Cleopatra's Egypt was stunning, brutal, and for most people living in it, almost impossible to survive. The world remembers Cleopatra for the drama, the politics, the romance, the war with Rome. But zoom out from the palace for just a second, and what you find is an entirely different Egypt, one most history books skip
This
straight
ancient
past.
document reveals
The
survival
average
across the
life
ages.
expectancy at birth in ancient Egypt hovered between just 19
Only
and
an elite
25
few reached their
years,
50s.
largely driven by devastating infant mortality rates. But surviving childhood dramatically improved your odds. Adults who made it through could reach their 30s or 40s, with the elites sometimes stretching into their 50s or 60s. That gap between the rich and the poor wasn't just about comfort. It was literally the difference between life and death. When Cleopatra took the throne, poverty was widespread. The peasantry was being decimated by famine, and Egypt's currency had been significantly devalued. The empire that had once stretched across the Mediterranean world was contracting, squeezed by debt to Rome and internal collapse. And none of that pressure landed on the palace. It landed on the people working the fields. Virtually the entire population of Ptolemaic Egypt was tied to agriculture, most of them as farmers. The Nile flooded every year, left behind rich black soil, and made Egypt the most productive grain producing land in the ancient world. Sounds like a good deal, except the person doing the farming saw almost none of that reward. The Ptolemaic rulers forced farming peasants to legally stay in their villages during planting and harvesting seasons. You didn't choose when to leave. You didn't negotiate your hours. After the harvest, the pharaoh could call on peasants to perform additional work for the state, leaving their villages to labor on irrigation works, quarry stone with primitive tools, or build tombs and temples. Their only compensation was grain, oil, fish, vegetables, and basic clothing. That was the entire deal. Work your body to exhaustion, eat just enough to survive, and do it all over again. And then there was the Nile itself, the source of everything, and simultaneously one of the most dangerous things in a person's daily life. The river and the surrounding deserts were filled with crocodiles, scorpions, and snakes, while diseases carried by flies and parasites threatened people with blindness, disability, and death. A 2024 study from the University of Cambridge analyzing mummies revealed the presence of several infectious diseases in Egypt, with the Nile being a key driver,
This bread contained
acting
traces
as
of
a
sand and
conduit for
stone or
tropical
ancient
waterborne
Egyptian tapes down to
parasites
the
that
roots,
would not normally
visible in
survive
skeletal
in such an
records.
arid region.
The original Nile channel is shown.
The
The
very
canal
thing
network
that
expands
gave
slowly,
Egypt
bringing
life
irrigation,
was
crops, and food
quietly
security.
killing its
But with it,
people from the
exponentially more
inside.
malaria exposure, worn
Malaria
teeth
was
browned by
everywhere.
grit,
The
vertebrae
annual Nile
deformed by
flooding
labor,
created
healed
enormous
fractures,
mosquito
iron
breeding
deficiency.
grounds,
The body
a
records
problem
what
that
the
only
papyrus
got
does not,
worse
the
as
bones of the
irrigation
archive.
systems expanded over the centuries. Rich or poor, both high officials and workers on Egypt's plains were exposed to the same threat of contracting malaria. That was one of the rare things that didn't discriminate by class.
This
Now,
grain
here's
fed
where it
Egypt.
gets even
It fed
harder:
Rome.
the food situation. Most people
There
ate
was still a
bread,
puny
beer,
person in this
and
land.
whatever vegetables they could grow or trade for. The average Egyptian diet consisted mainly of grains, vegetables, and beer. Beer wasn't recreational, it was a daily staple, sometimes used as actual payment for labor. Workers at Giza were given a beer ration 3 times a day. It was caloric, it was relatively safe compared to water from the Nile, and it kept people
Thank you.
moving.
We were so
But it was
hungry.
also a sign of how thin survival margins actually were. You weren't eating well, you were eating enough. At the very start of Cleopatra's reign, Egypt faced a severe drought and
During
famine.
Cleopatra's reign,
She
Egypt's power
responded
centered
by
on the
ordering
Nile,
royal
Rome watched
granaries
closely
to
from across
distribute
the
food
Mediterranean.
to the
The sea
starving
routes linked
population.
Alexandria to Italy,
That
undercut
move
geography
wasn't
and
just
fueled their
compassion,
rivalry.
it was
Buy
strategy.
sesame oil from the Delta.
Cleopatra was acutely aware
Step
that
aside.
hunger could
This
lead
is
to
extortion.
dangerous
Pay the
unrest.
duty. Hurry
A
up.
starving population
Tariffs
was
apply.
an
Leave that
unstable
for it
one.
first.
and instability was something she could not afford with Rome watching from across the Mediterranean. But famine wasn't the only crisis hitting ordinary people from above. The Ptolemaic government imposed high tariffs on goods, set strict price controls, established state monopolies over industries like vegetable oil and textile production, and fixed exchange rates for foreign currencies. Every layer of the economy was controlled by the state, and every layer of that control extracted something from the people at the bottom. You farmed the land, the state took the surplus, shipped it to Rome, and handed you back just enough to keep going. There were constant ethnic and class tensions between native Egyptians and the ruling Macedonian Greeks, dividing the peasants from the priests and from the officials who governed them. Cleopatra was actually unusual among her dynasty in that she learned to speak Egyptian. Mastering multiple languages was a genuine political survival skill for her. But for the common person on the street, those cultural divides meant that power almost never looked like them, spoke like them, or cared about what happened to them. Most people lived in houses made of sun-dried mud bricks, with windows and doors covered in mats to keep insects out. No marble, no columns, 4 walls of dried mud, a mat for a door, and whatever small objects they had managed to collect over a lifetime. That was home, and still, people decorated those homes, played board games, raised children, fell in love, and built something that felt like a life, because that's what humans do, even in the hardest conditions. Women in ancient Egypt had more rights than almost anywhere else in the ancient world. They could own property, run businesses, and testify in court. But the daily reality for most women was still one of enormous physical labor. Childbirth without anything resembling modern medicine, and maternal mortality rates that meant pregnancy itself was a serious gamble every single time. Analysis of skeletal and mummified remains has given modern researchers a clear picture of what ancient Egyptians actually suffered. Tuberculosis, worm infections, kidney stones, snake and scorpion bites, polio, and leprosy, alongside severe heart and vascular disease found in nearly half of the mummies examined in some studies. These weren't rare conditions. They were the background noise of daily existence. And through all of it, the famines, the taxes, the disease, the Roman shadow creeping closer every year, Egypt struggled with an unhealthy economy, floods, and political turmoil that never seemed to fully let up. Cleopatra's Egypt was one of the most sophisticated civilizations the ancient world had ever produced. Alexandria had a legendary library, towering architecture, and trade routes that connected 3 continents. But that brilliance existed on the backs of people who never got to see it up close. The ones who woke before dawn, waded into Nile water full of parasites, farmed land the state controlled, ate bread and beer until they couldn't anymore, and died, most of them, before they ever reached 40. That's the Egypt that doesn't make it into the movies, and it deserves to be remembered just as much as the queen who ruled it.